Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Faith and Family First, the Triple F podcast, with me and my co-host, Jim Hochberg. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the cases that are up before the Supreme Court. And do any of these cases have anything to do with religious freedom? So let's chat about that. Hello, Jim.
Well, good afternoon.
Happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you very much. But we did my birthday thing, which had nothing to do with my birthday whatsoever.
I know, but I know that you celebrate birthday for a very long time. In fact, before the show started, I asked people what was up with the look, and what was your answer?
From my birthday till January 1, because I go out of town for Christmas and I go to very cold East Coast snowy weather, my birthday is the day I quit shaving until I come back.
Okay. But
that's not really celebrating my birthday. That's getting ready for the cold weather.
I'm just tying it into the show to keep us nice and fluid. Okay.
Oh.
So, Jim, today
Yes, ma'am.
we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court's back in session, and there are some cases that may or may not have an effect on religious freedom. And I thought because that is your alley, that is what you specialize in, I wanted to give you the opportunity to, first of all, remind people about the Supreme Court and how that works and all that, right? Because not everybody watches all our shows, but also to dive into maybe some of the cases that you're interested in.
So first, I'm forced now, by use of the word specialize, to give a disclaimer. In the state of Hawaii, attorneys are not allowed to claim that they specialize in particular areas of law unless they actually, and there's only a few areas where you can do this, have gone through to become specialized. So I am not specialized in constitutional law according to the rules. Okay.
But you are a specialist when it comes to religious freedom, though, right?
Not according to the rules of the Hawaii State Bar Association.
Yeah, ignoring that.
You use the word specialist. You should say focus on or
Okay.
enjoy doing.
All right.
You say specialized, I got to jump on that.
Consider this a learned lesson.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I like learning everything. So that's good. So are you paying attention, though, to what's happening at the Supreme Court right now?
They get 3,000 requests or so a year to take their cases, and I am not familiar with most of them. I hear about some, and then people like you send me articles about some, and I'm then become aware of those. But no, I mean, nobody could possibly, if you didn't work there, keep up. Even SCOTUS blog probably doesn't keep up with everything.
Well, yeah, and this particular article that I did forward to you came out from the Catholic News Association, and the headline read, and this is why it got my attention, Supreme Court Preview, Religious Freedom Cases on the Docket. And then they listed a handful that they believe if the Supreme Court chooses to take them up, right? Because this isn't guaranteed that they're going to take them up. They're just on the docket.
What happens in a non-criminal case, criminal cases are different. In a non-criminal case, if you want the court to hear your appeal to them, you have to file what's called a writ of certiorari, asking them to consider and take your case for hearing. That doesn't mean you get argument, but if they take your case, I think most of the time they do have argument. I think 2 or 3% of all the requests every year make it. So because it's requested, it's on the docket to be considered, really doesn't mean it's going to happen. The more amicus briefs supporting groups file on your behalf, maybe the more likely it could be. I had Phyllis Young's Aloha Bed and Breakfast case from Hawaii, which was a religious freedom case. And we asked the Supreme Court to review a Hawaii Supreme Court refusal to review a Hawaii Intermediate Court of Appeals. Very terrible decision. And they almost did. They kept us on the review list for weeks and weeks and weeks, where they pretty much tell you pretty quick if they're not going to take it. And they didn't take it in the end.
Interesting. I don't know if you've been watching, but as you mentioned, there's a lot of news sources right now that are talking about what the Supreme Court is going to do or could do or might do or not going to do. And the one thing they refused recently was the case of the nurses that were suing over the vax. They were anti-vax, and the Supreme Court has decided they're not going to hear their case. Did you see that too?
Well, so here's the thing. Just because there's one court in one jurisdiction, whether it's a federal appellate jurisdiction or a state jurisdiction, that comes up with a particular ruling, that doesn't really interest the Supreme Court. What interests the Supreme Court is if there are two or more federal appellate jurisdictions, the Ninth Circuit and the Fifth Circuit, or the Second Circuit, Seventh Circuit, Sixth, whatever, that have similar cases on the similar point of law, that's federal law, and they reach opposite or differing results to a large degree, that is what the Supreme Court will have to resolve, because the federal law should be the same no matter where you live. But these circuit courts can come up with conflicting. I mean, just look at the Second Amendment stuff.
Right. Oh, I know. And that looks like we're going to be spinning around that issue for a while too.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to get into these cases in general. What they're talking about is the first case, and it has nothing to do with religious liberty.
Right.
It has to do with fishermen having to pay for monitors, the federal government monitors to watch them not violate the law.
But it seems like you're going to know more, but it seems like that the reason that they tied that in is because some recent court cases have used that ruling, like the Sisters of the Poor.
Not the fishing ruling, but the one that's underpinning the fishing ruling.
Okay. Yeah.
So let me explain it this way. When Congress passes a law, since FDR started this administrative state, the Congress passes the rulemaking authority to the Department of the Federal Executive Branch that's going to implement it. None of the people making those rules are elected.
Right.
They're all appointed, and except for the top couple of seats, they're civil servants, and you can't even get rid of them if they're bad.
Are you going to do your segue about voting and how important it is, and that's why you need to know?
I'm going to do a segue about the Convention of States.
Okay, I knew you were going to segue.
So Article 5 of this U.S. Constitution provides for amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The one that's been used exclusively is Congress generates the amendment, passes it to the people to approve. But Article 5 also says that the people have the right through their state legislatures to call for a convention of states to amend the Constitution. And I participated in August in Virginia in a trial convention of states, a test of how to do it. I represented Hawaii with Representative Elijah Pierik. We were the two Hawaii representatives.
If you want to get more about that, we did do a show about that. So look for that show, and then you'll see as Jim really digs into that.
Well, and the reason it's pertinent to today is before I went, they asked us as part of the invitation and the preparation if we thought we could propose an amendment that was on one of the three topics of the convention. We should submit it in advance so that they could get it in the materials. And my suggestion was not to allow these administrative agencies to have the authority to make rules. Change the Constitution that says any rule they want, they have to give to Congress, and Congress has to make it by legislation. They have to vote for it. They got to be responsible because nobody's accountable with all these rules. Well, that's what the first set of cases is about. Why is it that these non-elected, unaccountable bureaucrats get to make these rules that exceed the scope of the authority they were given by Congress? And the reason is, decades ago, there was a case, a Chevron oil company case. And what the Supreme Court said was, if it's ambiguous, if it's not clearly not permitted by the legislation, then the court should give deference to the administrative agency's reading of how they're supposed to do what they're doing. That flows out of FDR's and the progressive thinking political approach that we aren't smart enough as voters and politicians because we're not experts in these various departmental topics, and we need experts to tell us how to live. And the Chevron case set a standard that's been around for a very long time, that if the legislation doesn't prohibit the agency from doing a particular thing, if it's ambiguous, then the court should follow what the agency sees as its interpretation of the statute.
I'm smiling because you started the show talking about how you can't declare yourself an expert in the state of Hawaii because of the way our law is written. But you just said that we need to have experts tell us.
No, I said that's what the progressives think.
I know. That's what
I don't agree.
No, I know. So I'm laughing because I personally think you are an expert on that. And Jim is not making that claim, so don't come after Jim.
I'm telling you, the rules for lawyers in the state of Hawaii prohibit me from claiming to be an expert on a legal topic unless I have gone through the hoops they establish, which I've never bothered to do.
Well, and you shouldn't. But the point is that in your case, we can say that you're an expert. I can say I feel like you're an expert in this. You're not saying it. I am. But you've got a governmental group now that are going to claim these people are experts so they can explain it to us. But are they really experts?
Well, no, actually, would you say that for 40 years, Dr. Fauci was a medical health expert?
They would say.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
These federal agencies get these guys to run these sections because that's their degree program. They are experts. But they gave them too much power, and that's what the case is asking. There's this Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo case that's up at the Supreme Court because the lower court applied the Chevron case and said to these fishermen in Loper Bright Enterprises, if the agency of the federal government is saying under the statute you got to pay for the monitors to watch your fishing, that's what you got to do. And they're saying it's not what it says, and that case is terrible. And the reason the Chevron case was really bad is under the Obamacare existing craziness that went on from 2010 through the court systems with Hobby Lobby and the Sisters of the Poor and all that. That's what the Department of Health was doing. It was enforcing a congressional health mandate against people regardless of their religious convictions.
Yep. And that's why we have to stay. And this is why we're begging you to stay tuned, not only to this show, but to other talking heads out there that are Christian, that have a strong faith-based background, because some people are not going to make the connections on these cases, right? Like a normal person wouldn't have thought that that could potentially hurt religious freedom, but it did, because that's the way some people are interpreting this law.
Actually, I would go further because you try to be so balanced and fair, and I am an advocate.
Yes, I want you
I
to
would say that the Obama administration and the Democrats in Congress in 2010 intentionally wrote the Affordable Care Act so that they could force people that are opposed for any kind of reason to abortion to have to pay for other people's abortions in their health insurance. Well, that was part of their goal, I think.
And it's gotten worse, right? I mean, now across the board, you're seeing people of faith are getting attacked in every way possible when it comes to how they're doing their business, right? How they're running their churches and their schools. And I think this is just how I feel personally. And for you listeners and viewers, I'd love to hear if you feel the same way, but I feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better. I feel like that we're like salmon, trying to swim upstream. We're trying to make this, we're trying to fight for what we believe are the values that built this country. And we're getting slapped back and forth out of our seats.
So I know you don't like it, but I will tell you that in my backyard in Monroe County, New York.
Oh, here we go. We're talking about New York again.
There is a very big creek, and it actually has salmon in it. Swimming.
Oh, okay. So are you going to have fresh salmon? Can you fish in it?
My wife grew up in that neighborhood and says that by the time they get up that far, they're pretty well beaten up.
Okay.
But you can still catch them. I mean, salmon are fighting fish, but you don't really want to eat them.
Yeah, but we still have some of the best fish in Hawaii waters. Go Hawaii. Okay, so what else of these cases in here? Because they brought up a few of them. What else did you...
So in the article, they talk about my favorite religious liberty legal organization, Alliance Defending Freedom. And
of which you are a...
I am a allied attorney. And I'm kind of the only one in Hawaii, although not really. But I'm the one that does the cases. So
if you're an attorney and you're watching this right now and you're a Christian or you're in law school here in Hawaii, I want you to reach out to Jim Hochberg and ask him about the Alliance Defending Freedom, because I think that if you're in law school and you're going to get, you're going to take the bar here and you want to stay here, maybe this is an organization that you should plug into. In fact,
maybe we can put the jim@jameshochberglaw.com email on the screen.
Yes, let's do that.
So when I had Phyllis Young's law bed and breakfast case at the Supreme Court asking them to accept it, I filed my writ of certiorari hoping they would grant it. The Billy Graham Evangelistic Crusade, National Association of Evangelicals, I think the Baptists, something or other, a whole bunch of national evangelical churches filed, and other non-church organizations, filed amicus briefs supporting the request that the Supreme Court take the Aloha Bed and Breakfast case. And so this article talks about some of the groups that filed in the Loper case, which is the fish case, briefs urging the court to take it because of the religious liberty effect that overturning Chevron would have. And so there's a Christians Employers Alliance is the client represented by Alliance Defending Freedom, who argued in their brief that federal agencies have used their broad discretion that this Chevron case gives to justify taxpayer-funded abortion, mandatory health coverage of abortion-inducing drugs, the imposition of gender ideology throughout the country through mandatory health coverage of puberty blockers, and also the inclusion of biological male in women's sports. And these are all separate cases. And what Julie Marie Blake, the ADF senior counsel, said in her press release with her brief, quote, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats are weaponizing federal laws to violate Americans' most fundamental rights. And the reason that that's a big point is if your congressman were doing this, you could campaign against them in their next election.
Right.
So like Senator Schatz, for instance.
Schatz.
If he was the one doing this and the one accountable, you would have that response available. These bureaucrats never have to answer to anybody. There's nothing you can do. Perhaps because they're federal government agents, they could be impeached, but not if they're civil servants.
But it doesn't happen. I mean, it's the possibility is there, but the reality is that we're headed down this road.
Right. So this Loper case is being offered to the Supreme Court during this current term, which began a month ago in October. It'll continue to next October. Next June of 2024 is when opinions get released. So if they take the case and if they have a hearing between now and June, that's how we'll know. But the rule that overturns the Chevron case, if that's what happens, overturns it for every legal issue with every administrative agency. It's not just the fisheries, and it's a across-the-board blanket. And that's why ADF, Beckett Fund, and all these guys are interested, because they see it as a boon to protect religious liberty. And the Supreme Court, as currently staffed with our 9 justices, 6 of them being religious conservatives, more or less, way more than the other 3, may take the case about the fish because of the religious liberty, not because of the fish.
I hope so. I hope so. You know, one of the cases that they talked about in here, I kind of have been tracking only because, as you know, here in Hawaii, we passed a sexual orientation change therapy
So
bill.
you've jumped over the buffer zone.
Well, I'm sure you'll come back to the buffer zone, but I want to be able to talk a little bit, and I know about this one. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so and this one, because Hawaii passed that law that therapists here in Hawaii, they can only affirm gender identity now. Licensed. So we're not talking about the people that aren't licensed, but people that are licensed by the state, they can only affirm. That's the way the law was written.
But remember, and I'm sorry to talk.
No, that's okay.
The issue between acting licensed and acting pastoral, if you have a license, is a big problem.
Oh, it is. If you are licensed by the state of Hawaii and you are a pastor, it applies to you. It doesn't
until we win the lawsuit.
And we're going to do. And that's what's happening here. There was a therapist in Washington who said, and his name was Brian Tingley, and he sued because he said that this is unconstitutional. This is telling me what I can say when I'm in therapy with my clients.
Which is doctor-patient privilege. How can you tell them what to do?
And really, I think even reasonable people were thinking, when should the government have power to tell a therapist what he can or she can and cannot do in their therapy? And again, we're talking about people that are asking for this therapy. So we're not... Nobody that I've watched that have testified on this issue were saying that, hey, we want to beat something into this patient. It wasn't about that.
Unwillingly.
These are willing patients, especially when it comes to sexual orientation, because we made this clear when we testified on this bill that in cases where children are sexually abused, a lot of times when they become teenagers, they become confused about their identity. These are not people that may have been born that way, right? These are people that are struggling with this gender identification.
I will say that nobody is born sexually anything in their thinking. They're born a total blank slate. They have physical body parts that get attributed by the doctor on the birth certificate. This stuff about orientation and gender fluidity, it's not in newborn babies. I will never agree. There will never be a scientific way to prove that to me.
And I will tell you that for me, because I'm a Christian, I believe when it says that we are created in the image and likeness of God. And that means that from everything inside of us to how we present on the outside, I believe was created by the Lord. And so I would go there with you, understanding that there are some people that believe they're born that way. Okay. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people that want to have therapy because they have unwanted sexual identity.
So why do you think any legislature, including ours here in Hawaii, would prohibit a person who did not like the idea that they were having this struggle and they went to a counselor who could give them assistance in overcoming the problem rather than succumbing to the problem? Why would the legislature be against that?
Well, I would say, because I was there at the hearings, that none of this was touched on very much. What was touched on is that there was all this therapy that was bad that was happening, right? Things like electric shock therapy and all of that. But I remember talking to a couple of legislators offline, and I was asking them, get a report. Has there been any licensed therapists in the state of Hawaii that were doing any of these kind of therapies? Because first of all, it's outlawed. They don't do those kind of therapies anymore. So if there was a therapist here in Hawaii, I don't care Christian or not, who was doing these things, they should get their license taken away. But that's not what they were saying. They were saying that this stuff was happening. We have to make sure that it doesn't happen. The testimony of a lot of people at the hearing was all about all of this bad therapy stuff. And so I don't know.
And the need to affirm because of suicide.
Right.
Which also isn't really documentable.
Right. And so we're going to be watching this very closely because Hawaii has this law. So if the Supreme Court decides to take this up and this doctor wins, that will have an effect on Hawaii law, right?
Correct.
Yes. So now you can go back to the one that you're
Well, so in New York, Westchester County, which is just outside of Manhattan and the boroughs and all that stuff, they established 100 feet around abortion clinics, an 8-foot buffer zone that if you were praying in front of an abortion clinic within 100 feet of the door and you wanted to talk to somebody about not getting an abortion or about pro-life things, you'd have to stay 8 feet away or it's a crime. And so that's a case that has not yet been taken by the Supreme Court, but they're asking for it to be taken because it's a free speech violation with a criminal penalty. It's just not a good thing.
Would you have thought 20 years ago, because you've been doing religious freedom litigation for a very, very long time, would you have thought 20 years ago that you would see these kind of cases?
I'm not much of a futurist. I don't sit around pondering what could possibly come next out of some crazy idea.
But did you imagine?
I am a fighter that deals with the ones that we got now.
Yes. And that's important, and you're good at it for sure. But I don't know. I was thinking, so I got involved in public policy here in the state in 1994. That was when I got hired to do my first public policy job here in the state. So next year makes 30 years. And I will tell you that in my 20 years plus, I never thought that it was going to get like this, because I thought that religious freedom and freedom of speech and all that was something that everybody thought was sacrosanct. That's what I thought. But I guess I'm more of an Eeyore than you are.
Generally speaking.
Okay. So
then the last one on the article that you provided us is a lawsuit related to the abortion pill, mifepristone, and an appellate court ruled in August that the FDA, which is part of the federal government, these experts, right?
Yep.
Regulation, administrative agency,
yep.
They did not follow the required safety protocol when they deregulated that drug so that it could be sold over the counter. And it's been challenged, and the Department of Justice lost the deregulation of the drug because they didn't follow the legally required safety protocols. And so the Justice Department is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case and overturn the lower court ruling, which is very interesting.
Well, you've always had, at least since I've known you, especially after the whole fiasco with COVID and all that, you have a major problem with the federal government telling us what we should get injected into our bodies and what should be provided over the counter and what you can get now just by having a video chat with a doctor.
Well, it's not new from COVID. It's just accelerated because of COVID. Even before then, actually, you have to go back a couple of years, actually, and they weren't doing all this weird stuff. They were being brave and honest medical people. But it changed.
The experts changed.
Yeah, well,
or the definition of experts.
Yeah, they got bolder, and now they don't care. We got to get rid of them. Who are you voting for? Go ahead.
We know you care, and we thank you that you took time to sit with us today as Jim and I went through all of this. And there's more. You can go to the Supreme Court of the United States website. I believe
or
it's
SCOTUS blog.
SCOTUS blog.
SCOTUSblog.org. They're perfect. They're great.
Yeah, and that way you can follow what's happening over there. Stay tuned here at Faith and Family First as Jim and I continue to talk about some of these issues. And next week, Jim and I are going to be celebrating or getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving with you. So stay tuned, and we will see you all next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.
Thank you.